All right, Alexander, let's do a video on Russia and China and a meeting between the national security advisors of both countries. And we're talking about Nikolai Patrushev for Russia and for China, Yang Jiechi, I guess. I guess that's pronounced correctly, I hope. And he was, if people don't know who I'm talking about, he was the guy that completely crushed Blinken in Anchorage. So just so people can get a visual as to who he is, he really gave Blinken a dress down in Anchorage. And so these guys met, and it looks like they're moving forward with this alliance, which they don't call an alliance, but it is an alliance. Anyway, get into this story.
Absolutely. By the way, I understand the way pronounce his name is Yang Jiechi. It's complicated because Chinese pronunciation is difficult and the English transliteration isn't as we would normally think. But I understand Yang Jiechi. If anybody on our threads wants to correct me, please do. Anyway, to get to this meeting, now who are these two people? Well, you absolutely correctly said Yang is the official who obliterated Blinken in Anchorage. He is Xi Jinping's closest foreign policy advisor. He's a member of the Chinese Politburo. He's a very senior official. He's somebody who is to be taken very seriously, and apparently he is Xi Jinping's closest foreign policy aide. Now, Nikolai Patrushev is somebody whose background was in the Russian intelligence services. He is now the secretary of Russia's Security Council. He has an analogous position to Jake Sullivan in the United States and Yang Jiechi in China. He is Putin's national security advisor. He is also widely believed to be in overall charge of Russian intelligence. So he also has a post that is analogous to that of Director of National Intelligence in the United States. So he's both National Security Advisor and Director of National Intelligence. These are two very, very powerful people. And the reason they're meeting, and they're meeting in Moscow, and they're meeting face to face, is in order to brief each other and to prepare the ground in light of all these negotiations that are taking place between the United States and Russia about setting up the summit meeting between Biden and Putin. And the overwhelming impression I'm getting now, because we're getting a stream of commentary from the Russians, including especially from Sergei Lavrov, is that after that meeting in Reykjavik between themselves and Blinken, the Russians have come away completely unimpressed, and the Russians have been going out of their way now to say that the US is clearly trying to play them and the Chinese off against each other, and it isn't going to work. So the Russians are not impressed with the US, and they're working hard to strengthen their connections to China. They're also providing, undoubtedly, the Chinese with a detailed brief on their discussions with Blinken and Patrushev's own discussions with Jake Sullivan, who is Biden's national security advisor. And perhaps most ominous and important of all, we've now had interviews both from Lavrov and from Wang Yi, who is China's foreign minister, saying that there is no limit, no upper limit to China-Russia cooperation, and that the two countries are increasingly thinking about converting their strategic partnership into a straightforward alliance. So there we are.
So what's the end game here between Russia and China? Is it to take on the West, the United States, the EU, or is it to build up Eurasia? Is it both? I mean, what is exactly is it a type of Cold War in essence? Yeah. I don't want to. I mean, it's not a Cold War, but the West versus the East, so to speak. Or is it just about building up Eurasia and just going about your business, independent of the West?
You see, it's both. That's the thing to understand. I mean, the Chinese are saying, and they're saying it quite straightforwardly, that the point is that China and Russia are coming under enormous pressure from the US, and by cooperating increasingly with each other, they stalemate what the US is doing. It's making it impossible for the United States to succeed in implying sanctions on either, because let's say the US tried to put sanctions or tried to restrict imports into China of oil or food, the Chinese will get those from Russia. And if the US imposes financial or technology sanctions on Russia, it will get those from China. So they're able to do that and insulate themselves from economic and sanctions pressure from the US. And at the same time as they're doing that, they are obviously building Eurasia, because Eurasia for them is this giant economic bloc that is now emerging. And in fact, Lavrov gave an interview in which he made precisely that point. He said that this idea that the West is still stuck with, that the United States and the European Union, he was particularly harsh, by the way, about the European Union. Lavrov loathes the European Union. He respects the Americans, but he finds the Europeans completely ridiculous. Anyway, Lavrov said that this idea that they're still the center of the world is ridiculous. They're completely out of date. It is Eurasia where the real things are happening now. That's what he said.
Do you believe that it is Eurasia? Because there's a lot of people that talk about Eurasia. I mean, a lot of people.
Yeah.
Eurasia is the future. I mean, obviously, we have that famous quote from Brzezinski, who says, you know, he who rules, something along these lines. I don't even know if he's the one that said it, actually. But anyway, the phrase is he who controls Eurasia controls the world. That's the thinking there. I mean, I don't know how true that is in today's world, but I mean, do you really believe that it is Eurasia that's the future?
It is more true than it has been in the past. Actually, it goes back to a British geostrategist called Mackinder, who wrote before the First World War. And he said that he who controls Eurasia controls the world island. He who controls the world island, that's to say the core, controls the world. That's what he said. And you get people in the United States who play up that all the time. I don't think Eurasia is that important. I don't think he who controls Eurasia controls the world. I think that is a fantastic and ludicrous idea, actually. But it will be, if it all comes together, which it probably will, a very powerful economic and geostrategic bloc indeed. I mean, it's got population, it's got manufacturing ability, it's got enormous natural resources, and it's self-contained. It has what they call interior lines. It's invulnerable to blockade, so they can continue to develop and progress. I think that both the Russians and the Chinese are using this talk of Eurasia, in part, however, to increase their leverage over other powers, including the United States and including Europe. They're able to say to the Americans and to the Europeans, well, if you don't deal with us, we will do deals with the other side, with the Russians in the case of the Chinese, with the Chinese in the case of the Russians. So in effect, it's a formula the Russians and the Chinese are now using to, if you like, play the West off and to gain leverage over it. And I think to that extent, it is working. As the Russians have recently said, they don't think that the US would be meeting with them now. There wouldn't be all this talk about a summit meeting if the US didn't feel under pressure from China in the Pacific and the South China Sea. So that gives the Russians a degree of leverage over the US, which hasn't existed before, and which the Russians now have. And they're using it for all it's worth. I mean, and the Chinese understand that. And of course, they're playing for that too. They also understand that the closer they get to Russia, the more the problems for the US in the Pacific region grow, because the US then lacks the kind of economic and sanctions leverage over China that it once had. So that's, I think, partly what this is all about.
Okay, can Russia trust China? Can China trust Russia? There's a lot of talk, and you also hear this from a lot of analysts who say that going forward, they're going to turn on each other. One country's going to turn on each other. Of course, there's these claims that that many analysts make that China wants part of Russia, and they believe part of Russia should be theirs. And you get these types of territorial claims, which are being made as well from various analysts. But at the end of the day, you come to the argument that fine, they have this de facto alliance, but going forward in the future, they won't be able to trust each other. And of course, that's where the US comes in and Blinken comes in, and many administrations in the past, going back to Nixon, Kissinger, where you try to break them apart, you try to turn one against the other. And maybe you can make the argument that in the past, it proved successful to a certain point, to a certain extent. So do you think going forward, this de facto alliance can hold up? And is there any truth to the fact that there are territorial claims, historic territorial claims in Russia?
There were historic territorial claims, and they became very aggravated in the 1960s. But in the 1990s, they resolved them. They set up a commission, the Chinese and the Russians, and they agreed to a delineation of their common border. And the result is that they now no longer have any formal territorial claims against each other. Now, you do constantly come up with this thing that the Chinese and the Russians don't really trust each other, that in the long term they're going to fall out, that one day there will be tensions, and that this will be the opportunity for the US to move in. And of course, a lot of people in the US and in the Western community says that Russia in particular needs to be wary and afraid of rising China. I think the trouble with that is that, first of all, I think that's wildly exaggerated. I don't think the Russians, at the official level at least, mistrust the Chinese in that kind of way. But even if they did, given the amount of pressure they are coming under from the West, and given their experiences of interacting with the West over the last 30 years, I think they probably made, in fact, they definitely have made the decision that for the time being, at least, it is more in their interests to forge closer relations with China than it is to look to the United States as some kind of protector against China. At the moment, the Russians feel threatened by the West. They do feel threatened by China. It is the West that is pushing on them. It is the West that has just created a crisis, for example, in relations with Russia's ally Belarus. It is the West that is involved in Ukraine. It is the West that has imposed sanctions upon them. It is the West that runs information campaigns against them. It is the West that claims they interfered in US elections and carry out hacking and all that sort of thing. So when they're under that kind of pressure, they say to themselves, well, why should we spurn the friendship of a very powerful country that enables us to resist this sanctions pressure and enables us to gain, in turn, leverage over the West? If the United States really sets out to de-escalate tensions with Russia, if it really takes steps to de-escalate the situation in Ukraine by forcing, for example, Ukraine to negotiate with the people in the Donbass, if it scales down or ends sanctions, if it talks about Russia in a completely different way, if it accepts that eastward expansion of NATO was a mistake, well, then we might start to see a shift in Russian policy. But why would the Russians want to shift now? They see no immediate threat from China, whereas they see lots of problems in their relationship with the United States and with the West. And when the European Union comes up with crazy documents like that one from the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, which talks about wanting regime change in Russia. And when they see Western campaigns to block Nord Stream 2 and Western campaigns around Navalny, that makes them want to work with Russia even more, with China even more. So if the West wants to play that game of triangulation, if you like, then it's going about it in entirely the wrong way.
Yeah. Final question is, the biggest loser in all of this is not the United States, in my opinion. It's the EU. It's Europe, isn't it? I mean, because Europe, at the end of the day, they're the ones that went along with this game of trying to demonize Russia, and now they're demonizing. They're going after China in a way. I mean, you see them pulling back from China as well. You definitely see that trend. And you mentioned the Belarus incident. What that Belarus incident shows us is that for the first time in history, you're actually seeing some sort of international bloc that has formed actually do things and not care one bit what the hell the EU does in retaliation. I mean, once again, it doesn't matter whether you think right, wrong, in the middle, you don't care about what happened in Belarus with the Ryanair plane. But you do see that Belarus is sitting there and saying, you know what? I've got these big guys behind me, Russia, and knowing that I have Russia behind me, I've got China behind me. And then I've got some other countries in this, once again, alliance that no one actually doesn't really have a name, but it is an alliance that's kind of forming. And they're saying, you know what? I'm going to bring down that plane. I'm going to have it land in Minsk. I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to do, what I need to do in order to protect Lukashenko. This is Lukashenko speaking, in order to protect our sovereignty. And I don't really care what the EU does. It really shows. If it was the US, I think everyone would think twice, even with the Sleepy Joe as president. But if it was the US, you'd think twice. But the fact that it's Europe, you can tell that people really, really don't care. These countries really see Europe as the real loser and the real failure in all of this.
You are absolutely, completely right. You are so totally right. And in order to get a sense of how the Russians feel about the EU, you really need to read the statements they churn out, especially those coming at the moment from Sergei Lavrov, but from all sorts of other Russian officials. Lavrov thinks that the EU is run by a bunch of comedians. I mean, he finds it impossible to take seriously. Yes, the US they take very seriously. They may be very angry with the US, but they understand and respect its power. They also understand that the US is here to stay. The Russians certainly do not believe that the US is going to disappear from the scene anytime soon. There may be some people in Beijing who think that. The Russians certainly don't think that. But the EU, they find completely ridiculous. They find it utterly absurd, and they've given up on it. They say to themselves, these people are just not serious any longer about what they do. They impose sanctions on us. They talk to us about, values. They try to impose this terrible regime in Ukraine. They renege on all the agreements they've reached with us on economics, on commercial matters, on every kind of thing, and they expect us to take them seriously. And we're just not going to bother. At the end of the day, when it comes to the United States, we can talk about strategic arms limitation. We can talk about the Middle East. We can talk about Syria. We can talk about cybersecurity. We can talk about any number of things. What do we have to talk to the Europeans about? All we ever get from the Europeans is the Europeans standing on some kind of podium and handing us out lectures. And we're just not interested. That really isn't anything that concerns us at all. And that's a view the Russians have come to. And the Chinese are coming round to that same view too. They're saying to themselves, the Europeans are just ridiculous. They're not serious people. We've just negotiated this massive trade deal with them, and they can't even put that into effect. So why should we waste our time? And also, both the Russians and the Chinese look at the European economy. They see how utterly dysfunctional it has become. They see how economic monetary union in Europe has proved a complete disaster. They see how countries in Europe are becoming increasingly dysfunctional in their politics, how they can't put their act together, how political leaders come along every so often and say sensible things about foreign policy, but can't really make that work in any way, how there is a crisis in the Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, and the European Union has nothing, absolutely nothing to say. It can't even publish a statement. And they say to themselves, these were once great countries. France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Britain. Britain, of course, isn't in the European Union, but all of those countries, they're once great countries, but today they are just contemptible, and we have really no time to waste with them at all. They will deal with the United States because they must, and because they respect and to some extent fear its power. But the European Union, they don't take seriously in any way. And if you really want to get a sense of that, I do advise you to go through onto the Russian Foreign Ministry website and read the kind of things that Sergei Lavrov has to say about the European Union now.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the UK, and the UK is out, and the EU has been weakened, tremendously weakened, I believe. Yeah. I mean, we'll look back in history and realize that was just a huge moment when the UK left the EU. And what an opportunity for the UK, if it plays its cards right, to reassert its diplomacy and its position in the world.
I agree. And I'm going to say something about Britain. I think Britain at the moment is playing all the cards it has wrong. But I still believe that there will come a point in time when the British will rediscover their diplomatic skills. And I think the British have a past history of doing that, of being very hostile to Russia, and then suddenly and unexpectedly reconciling with it and forging ahead with it. And that will, I think, one day happen. And then when it does happen, it will astonish and dismay Europe and perhaps even the world. But the British do have that background behind them of showing that degree of flexibility. The Europeans, it seems to me, are at the moment, frankly, a lost cause.
Some would call them a clown show.
Huh?
Yeah. You mentioned, what did you say Lavrov called them? Or how does he view them?
A bunch of clowns. Yeah. I mean, go on to the Foreign Ministry website, read the Russian Foreign Ministry, read what he says. I mean, it is scathing. I mean, he talks, by the way, about the European Union far more in that respect than when he talks about the US, as I said, you see respect. He may be fundamentally antagonistic. He also clearly loathes Barack Obama. I mean, that's one thing that comes across very clearly from Lavrov's statements. But I mean, he brackets Obama with the European leaders, whereas you could see that with the US overall, he understands that this is a great power, a major adversary, a country with a strong economy, powerful military forces, an international global diplomacy, which he can understand. The European Union, he doesn't understand at all. And he is not going to take lectures from them. And what he says is a view I mirrored by every other important senior foreign ministry official in Moscow. Patrushev, who we were talking about, who's about to meet Yang Jiechi, he has regular conversations now with Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. He doesn't talk to anybody in Europe. Why would he want to? Why would he want to waste his time? And I'm not as informed about Chinese foreign policy because the Chinese conduct it far more secretly than the Russians do. You go to the Chinese Foreign Ministry website and you don't get the same amount of information. But it's the same. You read what the Chinese write. They take the United States very seriously. They don't take the European Union seriously at all. You're talking about Eurasia earlier in this program. Well, Eurasia may become a reality, But if it does, it will be the European Union that will be marginalized by it, not the United States. United States will remain a great trading power with operating all around the world. Eurasia will simply mean that the balance of political, economic, cultural power on the Eurasian continent, which remember includes Europe, will be shifting east. It will be moving away from Paris, Brussels and Berlin, more towards Moscow, Central Asia, those sort of places. And on your point about Belarus being able to stick up two fingers to the European Union because they got the big boys, China and Russia, at their back, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, Lavrov is smart. There's a reason he's the best diplomat in the world. That's the perfect way to categorize Obama and to look at the world and the geopolitics of the world. Obama definitely was the type of guy, and I've said it many times, that liked to have this neoliberal US-EU rat pack. Him and Renzi and Cameron and Merkel and Trudeau and Hollande. Obama liked that. Trump came in and he realized that the world has changed and it is a world of power politics. And he realized, you know what, I need to play ball and I need to deal with, in good ways and in bad ways. I'm not saying it's always, it's going to be a battle. But Trump realized I have to deal with Russia. I have to deal with China. And he realized the way the world is. Obama created this little fantasy land with his little rat pack of minions. And they would do their nice little photo shoots and have their nice little meetings and talk about their nice neoliberal values and stuff like that. But he was in La La Land. And Lavrov, I think, when he makes statements like that, he's kind of expressing the same views that Trump saw the world in. The same way that Trump saw the world is the same way that Lavrov kind of sees the world.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. That describes it precisely. If you read again Lavrov's statements, and they come out thick and fast. Who does he blame for the crisis in the international system? He always blames Obama. He always says these problems began with the Obama administration. He never talks about others. He doesn't talk about George W. Bush, for example. He certainly doesn't talk about Donald Trump, whom I get the impression he rather liked and respected. But Obama, he can't stand. And he makes that absolutely clear. He brackets Obama exactly with all those other European leaders, with Heiko Maas and Angela Merkel, with Hollande and all the rest. I mean, I'm not even going to start with all these European leaders, the Ursula von der Leyens, the Barrosos, the Charles Michels, all those, the Rompuys, all these laughable people who, he must consider them. I'm not going to. Well, what he says about them, you just have to read it and see for yourself because it's frankly very unflattering.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it to there. Guys, go to the Duran shop. Use the code REALNEWS. You'll get 10% off all the merch. And look for us on SuperU, on Odyssey, on BitChute, and on Locals. You will find all our videos there, including exclusive videos as well. And join our Locals community, guys. There's a lot of good conversation going on. Now, you'll find all the link down below. Take care.